The hyperbolic time chamber had a smell to it. Compressed air, raw ozone, and something older, like the universe itself had been folded into a room and forgotten. Gohan knew that smell by heart now. He'd spent what felt like a lifetime inside those white walls, training beside his father, pushing past Super Saiyan and reaching for something beyond it. But the smell that reached his nose on this particular Tuesday afternoon was different. It rolled across the Sun family yard like a thunderhead, electric and sharp, carrying with it a resonance that made the fillings in his teeth hum, and the grass beneath his feet stand perfectly still. Then the sky cracked open. It wasn't like a portal from a science fiction story. Clean edges, humming machinery, a polite invitation to step through. This was violent. A seam appeared over Satan's city like reality had been struck by something it wasn't designed to absorb. Jagged blue-white light bleeding through the tear in long, crackling fingers. The energy signature that poured out of it was unlike anything the Z fighters had cataloged. Not Kai, not demonic energy, not the particular divine pressure of a god of destruction's approach. Something layered. Ancient cosmic power braided together with quantum engineering, gamma radiation, and the unmistakable pulse of an infinity stone. 7 figures fell through the rift at different angles, like they'd each been yanked from a different point in the same room. A man in red and gold armor hit the ground first, repulsor jets firing automatically before he'd even oriented himself, slowing his descent just enough to avoid a crater. A massive green figure landed 20 meters away with no such grace. And the crater appeared anyway. 10 feet deep, radiating cracks across the pavement of an empty industrial district outside the city. A man with a star-spangled shield touched down in a roll so practiced it looked choreographed. A god with a crimson cape and a warhammer caught himself mid-air, golden hair whipping in a wind that hadn't existed a second ago. 3 others followed, 2 trained assassins moving with quiet, terrifying efficiency the moment their feet found solid ground, and an archer already reaching for his quiver before the dust had settled. Tony Stark's faceplate snapped up. His eyes swept the skyline, unfamiliar, but clearly Earth, clearly city, clearly not the SHIELD campus or any coordinate Friday had ever mapped. His suit's sensors ran immediate atmospheric analysis. Breathable air, standard gravity, no detectable radiation beyond background levels. Then the energy scanner pinged, then pinged again, then stopped trying to assign numbers to what it was reading and simply flagged everything within 30 kilometers as anomalous. "Friday," Tony said, his voice clipped and already calculating. "Where are we?" "Coordinates place us approximately 40 kilometers east of what appears to be a major urban center," the AI responded. "However, I'm detecting energy signatures in this atmosphere that don't correspond to any known source. Multiple signatures. Some are moving." "Moving," Steve Rogers repeated, rising from his landing crouch, shield already raised. His eyes went to Thor, who was hovering 6 feet off the ground, Mjolnir spinning slowly. His expression caught somewhere between warrior's focus and genuine curiosity. "Thor, you feel that?" "I feel many things," Thor said, and his voice had dropped to the register it took on when he was genuinely uncertain, which was rare enough to be alarming. There is power in this world unlike anything in the 9 realms. It is not magic as I understand it. It is not science as Stark understands it. It is something. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon. Alive. Profoundly, terrifyingly alive. Bruce Banner was sitting on a chunk of broken pavement at the edge of his own crater, holding his glasses, which had somehow survived the transit, and pressing them to his face with both hands. The other guy had retreated the moment they'd landed, apparently satisfied that nothing in the immediate area required smashing. Bruce was not similarly satisfied. His instruments, a battered handheld device he'd built into the sleeve of a jacket he no longer wore, were giving him readouts that made his chest tight. "These energy levels," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "They're not electromagnetic. They're not radiation. They're not any particle I have a name for. But they're—" He looked up. "They're enormous. Whatever is generating these readings, it makes a gamma burst look like a birthday candle." Clint had moved to high ground without anyone asking. The roof of a damaged loading structure nearby, arrow knocked, scanning. "We've got movement," he said through the comm. "Eastern tree line. Something's coming fast. Multiple somethings." He wasn't wrong. 40 kilometers away, Krillin had nearly dropped his ice cream. And the energy signature had hit him like a physical force, a sudden eruption of mixed, chaotic power that didn't read like anything he'd ever sensed. Not Saiyan, not Namekian, not the cold, mechanical blankness of an android. He'd reached out immediately through Kai's sense, trying to map it, and found himself staring at a wall of variables that made his head swim. Powerful. Some of the signatures were genuinely powerful. Others were human level. One was something else entirely. Massive, barely contained. The kind of energy that preceded very large explosions. His phone was already ringing. Gohan's voice came through before he could speak. "You felt that?" "Felt it. Can't explain it," Krillin confirmed. "What is it?" "I don't know," Gohan said. "But Dad's already gone." Of course he was. The Goku had instant transmitted the moment the signature registered. Not out of alarm, but out of the particular brand of irresistible curiosity that had defined every significant event in his life. He reappeared in the air above the industrial district, arms folded, Son Goku in an orange guy and a grin, looking down at 7 people who looked, to his senses, unlike anything he'd encountered in all his years of fighting across galaxies. He tilted his head, his ki sense pressed outward gently, reading each signature the way a musician reads sheet music, quickly, instinctively, cataloging intervals and intensities. The man in the armor. Human beneath the metal. Smart, no ki to speak of, but the suit itself hummed with contained energy that was genuinely interesting. The man with the shield. Peak human. He disciplined Kai's signature like a compressed spring, small but immaculately controlled. The green one, dormant now, but beneath the surface something colossal waited, volatile and incredible. And the one with the hammer. Goku's grin widened. "Hey," he called down, waving. "Sorry about the entrance. Rift energy is always rough on the landing. Are you guys okay?" 7 sets of eyes turned upward toward a man floating in the sky with no visible means of support, wearing what appeared to be a martial arts uniform, smiling at them like they'd just shown up to a cookout. Natasha's hand moved to her weapon. Tony's faceplate snapped back down. Steve's grip tightened on his shield. Thor stared upward for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he smiled back. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. The adventure never ends. Goku dropped out of the sky with the casual ease of a man stepping off a curb, landing softly in the space between the 2 groups with his hands behind his head. Up close, the Avengers got their first real look at him. Medium height, powerfully built beneath the simple orange and blue guy. Black hair spiked in every direction like it had been that way since birth and hadn't been argued with since. He looked, Tony's suit confirmed, completely human. No cybernetic enhancement, no power source, no exoskeleton. Biometric readings placed him at peak physical condition, but otherwise unremarkable. The suit was wrong, of course. It just didn't have the vocabulary yet to understand why. "I'm Goku," he said, like that settled everything. I live on Earth. Well, this Earth, or I guess an Earth. Yours might be different. He scratched the back of his head. Dimension stuff is more Bulma's area. I'm better at the fighting. Fantastic, Tony said flatly, repulsors still glowing. A dimension-hopping martial artist in a Halloween costume. Friday, is he a threat? Energy readings are unclear, Friday responded, and there was something almost apologetic in the AI's tone. He appears baseline human, but I'm detecting a field around him that doesn't correspond to any known energy type. It's almost like he's made of it. Bruce finished quietly from behind them. He'd stood up, glasses on, staring at Goku with the focused attention he usually reserved for equations that were almost solved. Whatever this energy is, he doesn't just generate it. He is it. It's woven into his biology. Goku blinked at Bruce. His Kai sense had already mapped the physicist completely. Mild signature on the surface, student-level control. But underneath that, something caged and colossal that breathed in a completely different register. He filed it away with considerable interest. Your friend's right, Goku said pleasantly. It's called Ki. Life energy. Everyone has it. But most people never learn to use it. On this planet, quite a few of us have spent our whole lives figuring out how. He looked at Thor then, and his eyes sharpened slightly. The grin stayed, but something focused behind it, the way a sword stays sheathed, but you can still see the edge. You're not from Earth. Either Earth. Thor descended slowly until he stood at eye level with Goku, 12 feet apart, Mjolnir resting at his side. The air between them had a texture to it, on the way air gets before lightning strikes, charged, expectant, waiting for something to decide the weather. I am Thor Odinson, Thor said. Son of Odin, Prince of Asgard. He studied Goku with the particular attention of a warrior who has fought everything the 9 realms produce and learned to read the dangerous ones by the way they stand. And you are something I have not encountered before. Yeah, I get that a lot. Goku's power level shifted. Not a surge, barely a flex, like a man rolling his shoulders before a stretch. But the ki that radiated outward in that half-second pressed against every person in the clearing like a warm, enormous hand, reminding them the world was larger than they'd assumed. The pavement cracked in a ring around Goku's feet. Not from impact, just from proximity. Steve stepped forward before anyone else could respond. In a situation with unknown dimensional coordinates, possible hostile contact, and 2 heavy hitters already squaring up, Steve Rogers defaulted to communication. It was not naivety, it was discipline. We're not here by choice, he said clearly, his voice carrying the particular authority of a man who'd learned that authority lived in the chest, not the volume. Whatever brought us here, the rift, the energy collision, it wasn't intentional. We're not a threat to your world. He looked at Goku directly. Can you help us get home? Goku opened his mouth, looked briefly thoughtful, then looked less certain. That's more Bulma's area, he admitted. She built a time machine once, and so a dimensional rift is probably... He wobbled his hand. Not that different. Maybe. She's going to want to scan everything and ask you 1,000 questions. He brightened. But first, you should meet the others. Others, Natasha said. It wasn't a question. Her voice had the quality of someone already building a tactical map. Sure. Goku's grin returned at full wattage. Piccolo's probably already on his way. Vegeta too, once he feels the readings. Gohan, Krillin. He paused, tilting his head to the side, reading something invisible. Yeah, Piccolo's close. 2 minutes. Tony's sensors confirmed it before the words finished. A new energy signature inbound. Fast, disciplined, cold-focused in a way Goku's wasn't. Where Goku's ki felt like sunlight through a magnifying glass. Warm, concentrated, fundamentally benign. This new signature felt like a scalpel. Precise. Ready. Piccolo arrived without theatrics. He dropped from the sky and landed with a sound like a judge's gavel. White cape snapping against his ankles, arms folded, emerald skin and weighted turban making him look exactly like what he was. A warrior who had moved past the need to look impressive because impressive was simply his resting state. He looked at the Avengers for exactly 3 seconds. "Dimensional travelers," he said. "Significant power variance within the group. One non-human, one energy source I can't classify." His red eyes moved to Bruce, to the dormant enormity beneath the surface, and Piccolo's expression shifted. Not alarm, but the particular focused attention of a tactician noting a variable. The large one's dormant form is a concern. "He's fine when he's calm," Steve said. "I can hear you," Bruce said mildly. "The question," Piccolo continued, ignoring the exchange with the serenity of a man who had sparred with the strongest beings on the planet and found social awkwardness comparatively manageable, "is what brought you here, and whether whatever caused it is finished, or just getting started." The sky answered before anyone could. A second energy signature tore across the atmosphere from the west, not arriving, but already there, already huge, expanding outward like a challenge issued to the universe itself. The ground vibrated. Birds left trees in every direction for miles. Tony's sensors simply displayed the word recalibrating where power readings should have been. Vegeta arrived at twice the speed Piccolo had, sun white gloves catching the afternoon light. The familiar widow's peak sharp above narrowed, cold, dark eyes. He stopped midair above them all and looked down with the particular expression of a man who had seen the far edge of the universe and returned mostly unimpressed. He studied the Avengers for one long moment. "Interesting," he said finally, his voice carrying the deep, measured contempt of someone who found things interesting in the way a scientist finds a new specimen interesting, curious, clinical, and already assuming superiority. "Dimensional visitors. Scouter would have been useful today." His gaze moved across them, past Tony, past Steve, past Natasha and Clint, and stopped on Thor, hovering with Mjolnir in hand, lightning tracing idle patterns across the hammer's face. Then it moved to the Hulk's crater, to the depth of it. Something recalculated behind Vegeta's eyes. "Some of you," he amended slowly, "are worth looking at." Thor moved first. In fairness to everyone present, it wasn't aggression. It was a warrior's instinct responding to a warrior's provocation. And Vegeta had issued that provocation as fluently as breathing. The crack of displaced air was instantaneous, Mjolnir already describing a short, devastating arc before Steve's shield arms shot out on reflex. But Goku was already between them. He hadn't used instant transmission. He'd simply moved, a step and a pivot so fluid it looked like the space between 2 points had quietly agreed to be shorter than physics intended. He stood with his back to Vegeta, one open hand raised toward Thor, his expression unchanged from that same infuriating calm that made him look like a man watching interesting weather. Thor stopped, and the electricity in Mjolnir's face crackled and then settled. "His attitude is unfortunate," Goku said pleasantly. "But his power is real. If you hit him, he's going to hit back, and we'll spend the rest of the afternoon fixing the city instead of figuring out how to get you home." He glanced back at Vegeta with the particular look a person gives someone they've known for years across every configuration of ally and enemy. "Vegeta, I wasn't going to attack him," Vegeta said, landing with his arms still folded, his tone suggesting that attacking Thor would have been beneath him. A statement that landed differently, depending on whether it meant Thor wasn't worth fighting or that Vegeta simply had better things to do. Thor studied Goku's open hand for a moment. The thing that had stopped him wasn't the gesture, but it was the energy field he'd walked into when Goku stepped into his path. Warm, immense, immovable in the way that mountains are immovable, not through resistance, but through simple mass of existence. He had not felt that from a mortal before. He had barely felt it from gods. He lowered Mjolnir. "Your speed," he said carefully, looking at Goku, "is not natural." "Probably not by your world standards," Goku agreed. "By ours, it's somewhere in the middle. You want to spar later?" Tony, who had watched this exchange with growing discomfort, cut in before Thor could answer. "Can we focus? Interdimensional displacement, potential return timeline, energy source of the rift?" He pulled up a holographic display from his gauntlet, a real-time map of the energy signature left by the rift's collapse, tracking its residual signature. Or whatever punched a hole between our realities used power on a scale I've never measured. And it's not fully closed. Piccolo stepped forward, studying the holographic display with genuine interest. His key essence was already working on the rift's residual. He could feel it hanging in the atmosphere like a healing wound, closed on both ends but fragile. "He's right," he said. "The dimensional boundary is still thin here. It'll restabilize over time. But something with sufficient energy output could reopen it, from either side. So we need to find a way to punch it back open from this side," Steve said. "Controlled, targeted. Or generate something that matches the original collision's frequency," Bruce said, already moving toward Tony's holographic display with the quiet urgency of a man for whom interesting problems were a kind of relief. The rift opened when two energy signatures of radically different types collided at sufficient intensity. The Mind Stone's resonance and whatever ambient energy exists in your atmosphere. He looked at Goku. "That field you generate, that Kiss, it permeates the air here?" "Every living thing has it," Goku said. "Then we need to generate a counter-resonance, a focused collision between our energy, specifically the stone, and a concentrated burst of Ki large enough to match the original impact threshold." He looked at Tony. "It's not unlike quantum tunneling. We create the conditions, the boundary opens. So we need to have someone from this world fire off a massive amount of this Kai energy directly at the Mind Stone," Tony said flatly. "In the simplest possible terms, yes." Everyone looked at Goku. Goku looked genuinely delighted. "Oh, I can do that. Probably Vegeta too. Maybe a Kamehameha." He caught Steve's blank expression. "Energy technique. Big blue beam. You'll see it when it happens." He paused. "But that's a problem for a few hours from now. We should get you somewhere safe first. And fed. Dimensional travel burns a lot of energy." The suggestion of food visibly relaxed several Avengers. It visibly annoyed Vegeta. What none of them felt, in that moment of logistical problem-solving and cautious introductions, was the other energy signature. It had been present at the edge of Kai sensing range for several minutes, cold, structured, perfect. It moved with no urgency, because it had no need of urgency. It registered the dimensional travelers and their power levels with the detached curiosity of a collector encountering new specimens before a curated display. In a valley 30 miles east, Perfect Cell stood on a rocky outcropping with his hands clasped behind his back, his insectoid eyes reflecting the distant crackle of rift energy. His tail moved slowly, once, like a cat's. 7 new signatures, he said to no one. 3 significant. 1. He paused, head tilting, reading the gamma-soaked dormant mass of the Hulk's suppressed form with growing, particular interest. 1 very, very interesting. He smiled the smile of a being who had been engineered for perfection and had achieved it, and was therefore perpetually in the market for a worthy challenge. These newcomers, he decided, they might provide something the Z-Fighters had begun to make routine. Genuine surprise. The spar between Goku and Thor started the way Goku's spars always started, with a suggestion that was technically a question, but carried the momentum of a done deal. They moved to a canyon wasteland, 40 minutes outside Satan's city, where collateral damage was measured in rocks rather than buildings. And the moment Thor's boots left the ground, with Mjolnir swinging, Goku dropped into his fighting stance with the ease of a man settling into his favorite chair. The first exchange lasted 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Thor unleashed a hammer strike that had cracked Asgardian battleships, followed by a lightning discharge that measured in the gigajoule range, followed by a forward charge that bent the air ahead of him into a bow wave. The wasteland lit up white-blue. Stone shattered in rings from the impact points, and thunder rolled through the canyon valley like a living thing. Goku blocked the hammer strike with a crossed forearm guard that shouldn't have been physically possible, redirected the lightning with a ki flare that simply absorbed it into his aura, and sidestepped the charge at the last half-second, appearing 6 feet to Thor's left, with his hair standing on end and his expression one of pure, uncomplicated joy. "That lightning," he said. "Does that count as your ki? Or is it more like a tool?" Thor landed, breathing slightly harder, eyes bright. "It is both," he said. "The storm is part of me." "Then let's go again," Goku said, and his aura ignited. A clean, powerful gold, Super Saiyan blazing to life without drama or announcement, simply there, and the air pressure in the canyon dropping noticeably as his power rose. Thor's eyes widened. Then he raised Mjolnir, and lightning answered from a cloudless sky. The Hulk wasn't supposed to come out. Bruce had been doing well, genuinely well by his own measured standards. The dimensional transit had been disorienting, but not threatening. The energy signatures around him were strange, but not aggressive. He'd found a corner of Tony's makeshift analysis station in an empty warehouse outside the city, where Bulma, who had arrived 30 minutes after Goku with a scanner the size of a briefcase, and the focused intensity of someone who considered dimensional rift analysis a welcome Tuesday, had set up a shared workspace. Bruce liked workspaces. Workspaces were calm. Then Android 16 walked through the door. Not aggressively. The massive android moved with the particular, careful deliberateness of a being who had learned that its size preceded it, and chose to compensate through stillness. Now he had come because Bulma asked him to collect energy readings from the visitors, and he carried the scanner like a man carrying a bird's egg, with hands that could crush steel, showing improbable, practiced gentleness. Bruce looked up, and the other guy knocked on the inside of his ribs. It wasn't the android's appearance. Bruce had managed considerably stranger. It was the energy signature. Android 16's infinite energy core, that self-sustaining reactor humming beneath the chassis, had no biological hesitation. No fear, no instinct. Just clean, bottomless power, constant as a star. And the other guy heard it like a frequency designed specifically for him. Bruce set down his pen very carefully. "I'm going to need a minute," he said quietly, to no one. He didn't get one. The warehouse wall came apart, not from impact, from pressure wave, like a gust of displaced air that preceded Piccolo's arrival at speed. He had been tracking an energy signature incoming from the eastern ridge, one he'd initially dismissed as geological, and reclassified with some urgency when it began moving at 90 kilometers per hour directly toward the warehouse. Everyone out. The second wall came apart, this time from impact. Piccolo had trained with Goku. He had faced Nappa, Frieza's soldiers, Cell in multiple forms, and the various cosmic inconveniences the universe saw fit to deliver. He had a finely calibrated sense of what required alarm versus what required attention, and what came through that wall registered firmly in the alarm column. It was large, green, moving at a speed that contradicted its mass entirely, and it hit Piccolo mid-warning with enough force to carry both of them through the opposite wall and 60 feet into the adjacent lot, before the Namekian warrior got his arms up and arrested the forward momentum with a grunt of genuine effort. The Hulk stood in the lot, chest heaving, head lowered. He wasn't rampaging, not yet, not fully. But the transformation had been sudden, triggered by Android 16's energy signature spiking when Piccolo hit his combat state, and Bruce's control had snapped like a thread pulled in 3 directions at once. The Hulk looked at Piccolo. Piccolo looked at the Hulk. Neither of them moved. In the demolished warehouse, Android 16 stood motionless among the structural debris, head rotating slightly as he processed the situation. His battle protocols had not activated. He was, as a general principle, opposed to unnecessary combat. He was also, as a mechanical reality, capable of bench press figures that would have caused an engineering crisis. Fascinating, he said, which was not the most useful contribution to the moment, but was sincere. Piccolo rolled his neck once, hearing the joints. He settled into a low stance, hands open, and assessed the Hulk with the cool efficiency that defined his fighting philosophy. Size, considerable. Speed, faster than the mass suggested. Control, minimal. Power signature, enormous in a way that resembled raw, unfocused quiche. More than it resembled anything else, all output, no conservation, no technique. Like an engine running at redline with no transmission. "You're strong," he said to the Hulk, the way one might observe a weather pattern. But you're not thinking." The Hulk's response was to remove a significant portion of the lot's surface and throw it. What followed was not a battle so much as a physics problem made kinetic. Piccolo moved through the debris field with Namekian precision, not always faster than the Hulk, but always exactly where the Hulk wasn't, creating space through positioning rather than speed. He took 2 direct hits, one to the ribs, one a glancing blow across the shoulder, and both left marks, which was itself information. The Hulk hit harder than Cell's early form, harder than most things Piccolo had cataloged. He caught the third punch, both hands, arms driven back 6 inches by the impact, boots cutting grooves in the ground, but caught. He looked up at the Hulk, across their locked hands, and kept his voice completely level. "Done?" he asked. The Hulk stared at him. The enormous green features moved through several calculations that were more complex than they appeared. The other guy was in there somewhere, reading the situation, reading Piccolo, reading the absence of aggression beneath the combat capability. Android 16, still standing in the warehouse ruins, spoke without turning. "He will calm if no one escalates." A pause. "I should not have activated combat readings inside. I apologize." The Hulk's breathing slowed. Once, twice. The red faded from his eyes by degrees. Piccolo released the grip carefully, stepped back and straightened his turban with a precision that suggested straightening his turban after a confrontation was a reflex earned through significant repetition. In the lot's entrance, Natasha Romanoff stood with her hands visible, not reaching for anything, watching the Hulk's chest rise and fall with the patient. Complete attention of the person who knew him best in any universe. "Hey, big guy," she said quietly. "Sun's getting real low." The transformation reversed slowly, the Hulk folding back inward like a wave retreating, until Bruce Banner sat in the rubble in shredded trousers, blinking behind cracked glasses. Piccolo looked at him for a moment, then at the depth of the gouges in the ground, then back at Bruce. "Next time," he said, with the tone of a man establishing ground rules, "tell me before he comes out." "Believe me," Bruce said, rubbing his face, "I would love that option." Android 16 stepped carefully over a piece of roof and set the scanner, still intact, held throughout the entire engagement, down beside Bruce with considerable delicacy. "Your readings," he said, "were very interesting. Tony Stark had a rule about feeling outclassed. The rule was simple. He didn't. Not because ego prevented the acknowledgement. Tony had spent enough time around Steve Rogers and Bruce Banner and a literal god to have had ego beaten into more reasonable shapes. But because outclassed was a temporary condition. Outclassed was a Tuesday. Outclassed meant he needed a bigger number, a better equation, a smarter approach, and those were problems with solutions. He'd been outclassed by an alien invasion, by a genocidal purple philosopher with costume jewelry, by his own creation. He'd survived all of it. He was revising the rule. Bulma had spent 40 minutes scanning his suit with the focused intensity of someone who found Tony's life's work intellectually interesting, but not particularly impressive given her own portfolio. She had, at various points, made small sounds that ranged from mildly intrigued to, "Oh, that's clever," to one extended pause where she simply looked at him and then back at her scanner with an expression that clearly communicated she was being polite. She had a time machine in a barn. Her husband had destroyed moons by accident. Her son could turn into a golden super saiyan at 14. Tony was adjusting. What he was not adjusting to was perfect cell. The first indication was Friday, flagging a new energy signature moving through the eastern corridor toward their position. Not the explosive open sky signature of Goku or Vegeta's ki, which announced themselves like searchlights. This was contained, deliberate, a tight column of power held carefully inside a silhouette, and the energy equivalent of a scalpel where everyone else in this universe apparently preferred broadswords. Disciplined, patient. Tony's sensors placed it significantly above the Goku reading from earlier, which had already required Friday to restructure her power scale algorithm twice. Then Cell landed on the warehouse roof, and Tony's sensors restructured themselves a third time and gave up assigning comparative values entirely. He was taller than Tony expected. Elegant in a way that was deeply unsettling. Not the blunt physical authority of the Hulk or Thor's divine bearing, but something engineered, every proportion calculated for maximum intimidation and minimum drag. The green-black carapace caught the light. The wings were folded. The smile was the worst thing about him. And there was genuine competition for that title. Iron Man, Cell said, reading the name from somewhere, apparently, because Tony hadn't introduced himself. Fascinating designation. I've analyzed your suit's energy signature thoroughly from a distance. He tilted his head with the curiosity of a collector examining a new piece. Repulsor technology. Arc reactor power source. Impressive for a baseline human from a universe without ki. The smile widened fractionally. Structurally, though, I'm afraid it's quite limited. Tony's faceplate was down before the sentence finished. Friday, give me everything. Power reading is off existing scales, Friday said. And there was something genuinely rare in her voice, uncertainty. I can confirm the biological-mechanical hybrid structure, fusion of organic and synthetic components, and an energy output that exceeds any single reading we've taken since arriving. Recommendation is, yeah, I know what the recommendation is, Tony said. He fired. The repulsor blast hit Cell in the chest, and Cell didn't move. He looked down at the point of impact, a scorch mark on his carapace, light as chalk, and then back up at Tony with an expression that was almost sympathetic. I've absorbed the cellular structure of every significant fighter on this planet, Cell said conversationally, stepping off the roof into the air with no apparent mechanism for doing so, hovering with the ease of someone standing on solid ground. Goku's speed, Piccolo's regeneration, Vegeta's combat instincts, Frieza's power ceiling. He extended one hand, and energy gathered in his palm. Not the clean blue of a Kamehameha, but something denser, darker, pulled from a deeper architecture. Your technology, Mr. Stark, is extraordinary for your world. In this one, it is a sword at a gunfight. The energy beam hit Tony's repulsor field, and the field lasted approximately as long as it deserved to, given the power differential, which was not very long at all. Tony went through the warehouse wall and across 40 feet of open ground and into the opposite structure. And Friday spent the next 3 seconds doing urgent structural integrity calculations, while Tony spent them doing urgent breathing calculations. Suit at 63%. Friday reported, recommend immediate tactical withdrawal. Working on it, Tony said, and fired a full salvo, every repulsor, chest beam, and shoulder-mounted countermeasure simultaneously, using the cover to roll sideways and get his feet under him. The blasts painted Cell in light and smoke, and Cell walked through all of it with his hands clasped behind his back, the smile never shifting, the carapace unmarked. Tony's mind was already moving past the immediate problem to the structural one. He couldn't hurt Cell with projected energy. Cell ate projected energy, had absorbed people who generated it at levels that made Tony's output look decorative. Physical contact was suicide at this power differential. Running wasn't viable because Cell moved faster than his suit's flight ceiling. But Cell wasn't here to kill him. Tony understood that with cold clarity. If Cell wanted him dead, the first beam ends the conversation. Cell was here to study, to catalog, to evaluate whether Tony's technology represented something worth absorbing or something worth dismissing. You want to know if there's anything in my armor you don't already have? Tony said, lowering his repulsors, but keeping them charged. His mind was moving at the speed it moved when everything was on fire, and the solution was somewhere in the smoke. You're not collecting power, you're collecting data. You're a living library who found a book from a universe you've never indexed. Cell's smile shifted to something that was, briefly, genuine. Perceptive, he said, for a human. I'm a very perceptive human. Tony was stalling, and Cell knew he was stalling, and Tony knew Cell knew. And none of that mattered because stalling was currently the best available strategy, while Friday rerouted power, and Tony recalculated everything he thought he understood about fighting in a universe where the power ceiling was somewhere above the clouds. What do you want? A demonstration, Cell said simply. Show me what your armor truly does when pressed to its absolute limit. I want to understand what the pinnacle of human engineering looks like. He spread his hands with the magnanimity of a being who could afford magnanimity because the alternative wasn't interesting. Consider it a gift. Most people in this universe never get to fight me at anything less than my full potential. Tony stared at him for a long moment. In the corner of his display, a Friday flagged 2 incoming Kai signatures moving at significant speed from the northwest. Goku's reading and a second one, disciplined and cold, that the system had labeled Vegeta. 20 seconds, maybe 30. All right, Tony said, and his suit began the process of emergency overclock. Pushing the arc reactor beyond its standard operational parameters in ways that the manual, if there was a manual, would describe as extremely inadvisable. The chest piece burned brighter. The repulsors climbed pitch. Every system redlined, and Tony stood inside it and held the overload steady with the particular focus of a man who had flown a nuclear weapon through a wormhole and came back for the party. He hit Cell with everything the suit had ever held, pushed past every safety limit, channeled through every emitter simultaneously in one sustained. A brilliant, catastrophic discharge that lit the industrial district like a second sun. Cell stood in the center of it, arms folded, eyes closed, head slightly tilted, absorbing every joule with the serene attention of a musician hearing a new instrument for the first time. The suit hit 0% active systems, and Tony hit the ground on one knee, faceplate sparking, the arc reactor cooling from white back to blue. Cell opened his eyes, uncrossed his arms, looked at Tony with something that was the closest his engineered face could come to respect. Extraordinary, he said softly. Truly, for what you are. He turned as Goku's key signature descended from above, the gold aura of Super Saiyan blazing across the wasteland, but not what I came for. He looked up at Goku with a smile that had nothing mild in it at all. Cell said, "The real entertainment arrives." Vegeta landed between Goku and Cell. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't planned. It was the simple, reflexive assertion of a Saiyan prince who had decided, in the approximately 4 seconds between reading Cell's energy signature and arriving at the scene, that whatever happened next would happen in an order that he determined. Not Goku, not the dimensional visitors, and certainly not a bioengineered abomination wearing the stolen cells of every fighter Vegeta had ever respected. "You," he said to Cell, his voice carrying that precise register of contempt that sounded almost like boredom and was in fact the most dangerous tone Vegeta produced. "You picked an interesting day to come looking for a fight." Cell regarded him with the pleasant attention of someone who has encountered a predictable but enjoyable variable. "Vegeta?" "Yes. I wondered when Saiyan pride would drag you into this." The air between them had a temperature. It pressed against Tony from 30 feet away, even through a suit running on emergency reserves. And he made a note that whatever these two were generating before anyone threw a punch, it already exceeded every active combat reading he'd taken since arriving in this dimension. Steve had reached Tony's position, shield up, taking in the scene with a rapid tactical assessment that made him exceptional at operating in situations that should have been impossible. He registered Cell, registered Vegeta and Goku, registered the demolished warehouse and the scorch patterns across 300 square feet of concrete, and crouched beside Tony without looking away from Cell. "How bad?" he asked quietly. "The green one?" Tony's voice was flat. "He hit me with something that makes Thanos look like he had boundary issues." A pause. "My suit is a paperweight until I can get to a power source." Steve's jaw set. "Then we need to keep him occupied until you're back online." He looked at Vegeta, at the controlled volcanic energy barely contained in the Saiyan Prince's rigid posture, and made a rapid calculation that most people would not have arrived at. He's not going to let Cell get to us. Not because he wants to protect us. Because Cell fighting us instead of him is an insult to his pride, Tony confirmed. "Yeah, I read that one too," He looked at Steve. "You're about to do something tactically insane, aren't you?" Steve was already moving. What Captain America understood about combat that most enhanced beings missed was that force was only one variable among many, and not always the decisive one. He had fought things that could throw tanks. He had stood in front of armies. He had held a door against a god. The lesson each time was not about matching force, but about redirecting it, about being the thing in the equation that behaved unexpectedly. He stepped into Cell's sight line with his shield raised and his voice carrying clearly over the charged air. "You said you wanted a demonstration of limits," Steve said. "You got one from him." A nod toward Tony. "Now you've got one from me." Cell turned. The curiosity on his face was genuine, which was somehow more unsettling than hostility would have been. A baseline human. No Kai, no enhancement beyond physical conditioning and a vibranium alloy shield. He tilted his head. "You understand this is not a fight you can win." "I know," Steve said simply. "Do it anyway." He threw the shield. The throw was perfect. 40 years of muscle memory in a body engineered for exactly this. The arc calculated not to hit Cell directly, but to bounce off the structural column behind him, change angle, and come back at a vector Cell's forward attention wouldn't naturally cover. It was a technique that had worked against opponents with superhuman reflexes, against robots, against alien soldiers. Cell caught it with 2 fingers. He held it up, examining it with what appeared to be genuine aesthetic appreciation. Vibranium. Extraordinary material. Not of this universe's periodic table. He handed it back to Steve with a courtesy that was its own form of devastation. "Your tactical instincts are remarkable for someone with your physical parameters. You identified the angular approach that accounted for my probable response pattern, and executed with precision that most Kai-trained fighters couldn't match." He paused. "You simply exist in a universe where those instincts meet a ceiling several orders of magnitude below what stands before you." Vegeta, watching this from 8 feet off the ground with his arms folded, made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Thor arrived from the northeast, the crack of Bifrost-adjacent energy announcing him a half-second before he landed, lightning cascading off Mjolnir in long arcs that scorched the ground in a 30-foot radius. And he had left the spar with Goku when Friday's emergency signal reached the comm unit Tony had given him. A gesture of inclusion that Thor had accepted with the particular dignity of a man who understood tactical communication even across dimensional lines. He looked at Cell. Cell looked at him, a genuine cosmic power signature, Cell said. And there was something new in his voice. Not the indulgent appreciation he'd applied to Tony and Steve, but a sharper attention, a recalibration. Divine energy. Not Kai, not technology. Something older. The tail moved once. "I have not absorbed anything like this before." "You will not absorb it today either," Thor said, and raised Mjolnir. What followed was the most electrically spectacular 30 seconds the industrial district outside Satan City had ever experienced. Thor fought the way Asgardian warriors fought, not with the infinite martial patience of Kai-trained fighters, but with the overwhelming, storm-fronted aggression of a warrior who had spent 1,000 years learning that the best way to end a fight was to make continuing it structurally inadvisable. Lightning came down in columns. Mjolnir moved at speeds that bent light. The shock waves from each impact registered on Bulma's scanner 14 kilometers away and made her stop mid-sentence. Cell absorbed 4 strikes and redirected the 5th with an energy palm that sent Thor skidding back through a chain-link fence. But he was moving differently now. Not the casual, hands clasped behind the back stroll he'd maintained against Tony. His feet were set, His attention was fully extended. "Remarkable," he said. And this time, the word held weight. Vegeta dropped from the sky. The elbow strike he delivered to the back of Cell's head wasn't elegant. It wasn't telegraphed with a speech or preceded by a declaration of Saiyan superiority. It was a Saiyan prince who had decided that Cell being impressed by someone else for more than 30 seconds was a problem requiring immediate correction. The impact drove Cell 3 feet into the ground and detonated the surrounding pavement in a ring of fractured concrete. Cell rose from the crater, brushed dust from his shoulder, and looked at Vegeta with an expression that was almost delighted. "There it is," he said. "I wondered how long the prince would wait." "Not long," Vegeta confirmed. Aura igniting to Super Saiyan Blue. The clean, divine blue of God Kai channeled through Saiyan transformation, and the air pressure dropping around him like a physical wall. "The difference between you and these travelers, Cell, is that they're worth something. You're an experiment that got ahead of itself." Steve, watching from beside Tony, said quietly, "Is that our ally?" "I think that's as close as we get," Tony said. Goku landed beside them both, Super Saiyan Gold still burning, glancing at the Cell and Vegeta standoff with the expression of a man who was simultaneously preparing to join a fight and genuinely pleased about the company. "Don't worry," he said cheerfully. "Vegeta's got it for now." He looked at Tony's darkened suit. "You okay?" "Structurally intact," Tony said. "Ego is in critical condition." "That'll recover," Goku said, now with the breezy confidence of a man who had no ego to damage and therefore found the concept theoretical. Across the ruined lot, Cell and Vegeta began to move, and the ground between them turned to gravel from the pressure of their exchanged Kai before the first blow landed. Nobody saw Cell absorb the android. That was the problem with a battlefield where energy signatures overlapped in 16 directions and the combatants moved faster than conventional perception could track. Details happened in the margins. Android 16 had been moving through the eastern perimeter of the engagement zone, executing a quiet evacuation of 3 civilian vehicles that had strayed into the district. When Cell broke off from Vegeta in a single surgical burst of speed that covered 300 meters in less time than it took Vegeta to register the absence. The absorption took 4 seconds. Cell reappeared at the center of the lot, and the difference was immediately, viscerally, apparent. The contained, undisciplined column of power that had made Friday recalibrate 3 times expanded outward like a pressure wave. Not an explosion, not a key burst, but a simple increase in ambient energy output so significant that the air changed temperature in a 60-meter radius. Goku felt it first, his expression shifting from combat ready to something graver. Vegeta felt it a half-second later and went still in the way that very powerful beings go still when they encounter something that requires full reassessment. Tony's suit, running on emergency reserves with Friday operating at minimal function, registered it as a single flat alert. Power increase. Significant. Reclassifying. Cell stood with his eyes closed for a moment, cataloging the addition. Android 16's infinite energy core. That bottomless and self-sustaining reactor that had made the Hulk's dormant form take notice. Folded into his existing architecture with a seamlessness that suggested he had been designed with exactly this kind of integration in mind. When he opened his eyes, they were brighter. 16, he said softly, with something that might have been gratitude in a being capable of it. Your power was always wasted on pacifism. Goku's aura flared. Cell, don't. Piccolo had arrived at some point during the Vegeta-Cell exchange, moving in silence on the perimeter. and his voice cut through the charged air with the authority of a tactician who had spent the last 5 minutes mapping vectors and exit points. He stood 20 feet from Goku, cape still, red eyes moving between Cell and the Avengers with the rapid precision of someone running multiple calculations simultaneously. Don't engage yet. He wants the reaction. He wants you burning Kai before the real fight starts. Cell smiled. Piccolo. Always the strategist. It's why I kept your cells. Raw power has its uses, but pattern recognition is underrated. Pattern recognition, Piccolo said evenly, is telling me you didn't absorb 16 for the power increase alone. You absorbed him because his energy signature masks something else you're building toward. His eyes narrowed. You want the dimensional energy. The pause Cell allowed before answering was itself an answer. Steve had reformed the Avengers into a loose tactical cluster near the warehouse ruins. Thor on the outer edge, Natasha and Clint in covered positions, your Bruce sitting against a concrete barrier with his hands very deliberately flat on his knees and his breathing very deliberately measured. Steve stood between them in Cell's position, shield grounded, watching. Talk to me, he said to Goku quietly, without turning. Cell absorbs people to get stronger, Goku said. His voice was still easy, but the gold aura around him had compressed, gone denser, the way a flame goes bluer and hotter when you restrict the oxygen. Every person he absorbs makes him more powerful and adds their abilities to his. 16 was... He paused. 16 was strong, and his energy type was different enough that Cell's been wanting it for a while. And the dimensional energy Piccolo mentioned? Goku looked at the rift residual hanging in the atmosphere, like that thin scar in the boundary between universes that Bruce and Tony had been working to reopen in controlled conditions. If Cell could absorb dimensional energy, the frequency of the rift, the resonance from your universe, he'd have access to power types that don't exist in ours. A pause. He'd be unstoppable, Steve suggested. More unstoppable, Goku said. He's already pretty unstoppable. This would be worse. Then we don't let him get to the rift, Steve said. He turned to look at Tony. How long until the suit's operational? Tony was crouched beside an exposed power coupling in the warehouse wall, one gauntlet removed, working with the focused speed of a man who had rebuilt an arc reactor in a cave and considered that an instructional baseline. 15 minutes for partial function, 20 for combat capability. And the reactor needs to thermally stabilize before I push output again, or I'm going to have a different kind of problem. You have 10, Steve said. It wasn't unkind. It was just the number. Tony looked at him for a moment. Then I'll have it in 10. Clint's voice came in over the comm. He'd moved to an elevated position on the warehouse's intact roof section, his vantage point giving him sight lines across the entire lot. Cell's not attacking, he reported. He's positioning, moving slowly toward the northeast, toward where the rift residual is strongest. He's taking his time because he doesn't think anyone here can stop him. Can anyone here stop him? Natasha asked. The honest silence that followed had a specific texture. Goku and Vegeta together, Piccolo said from across the lot, yet apparently hearing the question through Kai's sense at 40 feet. He didn't make it sound reassuring. It would be a significant fight. After absorbing 16, Cell's ceiling has moved again. We don't know exactly where it sits. Vegeta's reaction to this was to power up further, not to Super Saiyan Blue, but to the intermediate state, the energy crackling around him in dense, violent arcs as he reassessed Cell's new signature with the particular expression he wore when recalculating how much strength would be required to make a point about Saiyan superiority. It was not a comfortable expression to be near. "We fight him here," Vegeta said, "before he reaches the rift. He doesn't get to absorb dimensional energy and become something worse." "Agreed," Goku said. He looked at Steve. "Your team, stay behind us. Lucas Cell is beyond your combat range right now." Steve's expression moved through several positions quickly, and Tony, watching from his crouched position at the power coupling, recognized all of them because he'd felt them all before in rooms where someone explained that his technology wasn't the deciding factor. Steve landed on the same place Tony always landed. Not on injured pride, but on tactical reality and the next useful thing. "What can we do?" Steve asked. Piccolo looked at him, then at Clint's position on the roof, then at Natasha's covered firing line. His tactical mind assembled possibilities with the efficiency it had been honed to over years of training warriors and fighting wars. "You're Archer," Piccolo said. "His arrows, any specialized types?" "Energy disruption, electromagnetic pulse, or frequency-based." Clint's voice came back immediately. "EMP, sonic, cryo, a few Stark-Tech experimental types I haven't field-tested yet." Piccolo's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Cell's key absorption works through contact and sustained energy intake. A sonic disruption to his absorption frequency during Goku and Vegeta's assault could break his concentration at a critical moment. It won't hurt him. But it doesn't need to hurt him. "Just interrupt him," Clint finished. "I can do that." "Thor," Piccolo continued, turning. "Your lightning is divine energy, not Kai. Cell can redirect ki-based attacks. Divine energy he has to physically weather. You can't fight him at his current level, but you can be a variable he has to account for, which takes processing away from his combat response." Thor raised Mjolnir, that lightning already responding to his rising intent. "I am very good at being a variable." "Bruce," Steve said quietly. "I know," Bruce said, eyes still closed, hands still flat. "I know. Not yet." A breath. "But I'll know when." The Hulk, under the surface, pressed against the inside of that containment like something enormous leaning against a door. Patient, waiting, reading the energy signatures around it, with a hunger that had nothing to do with Bruce Banner's careful restraint and everything to do with the fact that Cell's new power level had crossed a threshold that the other guy recognized as something worth waking up for. Cell had stopped moving. He turned to face them all. Z-fighters and Avengers, Saiyans and gods and soldiers and assassins and scientists. And his expression held something that, in a different being, might have been appreciation. "All of you," he said, "working together. How unexpectedly touching." He settled into a fighting stance that was almost leisurely. "Let's find out what cooperation looks like against something that has already absorbed the best this universe has to offer." Goku shot forward. Goku hit Cell like a comet. The first exchange covered 200 meters of open ground in under a second, both fighters moving at speeds that reduced them to afterimages and pressure waves. The sonic booms arriving at the Avengers' position a full beat after the impacts that caused them. Steve tracked it with trained eyes, managed to follow approximately 30% of what was happening. Clint, from his elevated position, watched his targeting system simply refuse to lock on either combatant and switched to manual with the resigned professionalism of a man accustomed to the universe exceeding his equipment. Goku was faster than Cell in straight-line speed. Cell was stronger in sustained output after absorbing Android 16. The gap between them was narrow enough to be interesting and wide enough to matter, and the first 10 seconds of engagement made both facts clear simultaneously. Goku landed strikes that drove Cell back in 10-meter increments. the ground cratering beneath each exchange, shockwaves rolling outward in concentric rings that progressively demolished every standing structure in the industrial district's eastern half. Cell landed 3 strikes that Goku absorbed on crossed arms and was driven back 30 feet each time, boots cutting trenches in the earth. Then Vegeta hit Cell from behind with a final flash. The beam was gold and enormous, and hit Cell in the back with enough force to generate a detonation visible from 40 kilometers. The shockwave flattening a hillside and sending a column of dust 2,000 feet into the air. Tony's partially restored suit registered it, and Friday simply said, "You recalibrating upper power threshold again," with a resignation that suggested the algorithm had begun to anticipate this as an ongoing condition of this universe. Cell emerged from the smoke, carapace scorched for the first time, and the smile was gone. "Better," he said, and his aura ignited fully. Dense, dark, the power pressing outward like a physical expansion of the world's mass. The ground cracked in concentric rings beneath him without anyone touching it. The air temperature dropped 4 degrees. "Now we're having a conversation." Piccolo had been waiting for the smoke cover. The moment the final flash detonated, he was already moving. A flat sprint along the ground, angled to approach Cell's left side during the brief window, when Cell's attention would be reassessing the dual attack. He gathered Kai into both hands, running. Unleashed the special beam cannon spiraling to life with a drilling whine that cut through the detonation's echo. He fired it at Cell's left arm. It connected. Cell's left arm from the elbow down ceased to exist as a structural unit for approximately 4 seconds before the regeneration closed the wound. But 4 seconds was long enough for Goku to be inside Cell's guard with a point-blank Kamehameha that drove Cell underground. From the rooftop, Clint loosed the sonic arrow. The shaft hit the lip of the crater Goku's Kamehameha had carved and detonated at frequency range specifically calibrated to disrupt concentrated energy patterns. A Stark Tech prototype that Tony had designed for application against energy shields and never field-tested because the opportunity hadn't presented itself until now. The frequency wave rolled through the crater in a tight, focused pulse. Cells surfaced from the crater and paused. Just for a moment, half a second, the absorption frequency of his cellular structure stuttering slightly, the Kai he was drawing from the atmosphere hiccuping in its intake. It wasn't pain, it wasn't damage. But it was visible, and Piccolo was already reading it. "It works," Piccolo said flatly, and his voice carried the contained satisfaction of a tactician whose variable behaved as predicted. "Copy that," Clint said, already knocking a second shaft. Thor came in from directly above, Mjolnir swinging in a downward arc that called lightning from every cloud within visible range. The divine energy crackling in columns that struck the ground around Cell in a ring before the hammer itself arrived. Cell raised both arms to weather it, and the exchange drove him down 6 inches into the earth. The divine energy doing what Piccolo had promised. Not wounding him, but demanding processing, requiring Cell's formidable combat intelligence to actively manage rather than passively absorb. "He can't redirect it," Thor reported, skying back out of Cell's immediate reach. "He weathers it, but it costs him." "Stay in rotation," Steve ordered. "Don't give him a static target." What was emerging, raggedly and without prior rehearsal, was a combat architecture that neither team had designed. Goku and Vegeta drove the primary engagement, Super Saiyan and Super Saiyan Blue exchanging positions, alternating pressures so Cell could never fully orient on a single attacker. Piccolo maintained flanking discipline, never overcommitting, he taking precise shots in the gaps. Thor rotated through strike windows, divine lightning spending Cell's processing budget. Clint's sonic disruptions were the smallest variable and the most disproportionately useful, each one creating the half-second stutter that allowed the close-range fighters to extend exchanges they'd otherwise have had to break off. Natasha had moved to Tony's position. Not to fight Cell, she had assessed that equation with characteristic clarity and arrived at the honest answer. But because Tony's suit coming back online had become the second most important variable on the field, and Tony working alone was slower than Tony with someone managing his periphery. "Left coupling," she said, handing components before he asked for them. "I see it," Tony said, hands moving. "Reactor is at 40% and climbing. I need the secondary emitter array online before I push output." "What does 40% get you? Against Cell?" Tony's voice was flat. "Moral support against the rift problem?" He looked up briefly. "Actually useful." Natasha looked at him. "Bruce's contingency?" "Yeah." Tony's hands didn't stop moving. "If Cell gets to the rift before we solve the return equation, none of this matters. He absorbs dimensional energy and we lose both problems simultaneously." He snapped a coupling into place. "Bruce can buy us time if it goes wrong. I need to be ready to use that time." Across the lot, Bruce sat with his eyes open now, watching Cell weather Thor's lightning, watching Goku and Vegeta push and adapt and push again. His hands were no longer flat on his knees. They were resting loosely at his sides. The Hulk pressed against the inside of him steadily, not urgently, with the patience of something that had learned patience was strategic. Bruce was running his own calculation. Cell's new power level after absorbing 16. The combined output of Goku, Vegeta, Piccolo, and Thor. The gap between those two quantities. The calculation kept returning a result he didn't like. Cell broke Vegeta's guard. It happened fast. Cell feinted left, drew Vegeta's guard across, and drove a straight palm strike into Vegeta's solar plexus with his full post-16 power. The impact was catastrophic. Vegeta went from Super Saiyan Blue to base form in the travel time between Cell's palm and the hillside 300 meters behind him. The Saiyan Prince embedded in rock up to his shoulders, conscious but requiring several seconds to remember the relevant details of being conscious. Goku moved to cover the gap, and Cell was already there, faster than Goku had seen him move. A knee strike catching Goku in the ribs and folding him momentarily. The spirit bomb gathering that Goku had been quietly building in the back of his key reserves, disrupting and dispersing. The battlefield went briefly, terribly quiet. Cell straightened, looked at the assembled fighters, then turned his face toward the northeast, toward the rift residual's thin scar on the atmosphere, and took one step in that direction. Bruce Banner closed his eyes, opened them green. The sound the Hulk made when he stood up was not a roar. It was quieter than that, which was somehow worse. A long, low exhalation from a chest the size of a wardrobe, and the sound of something that had been waiting with great patience, finally deciding patience was over. The concrete beneath him didn't crack. It compressed. The Hulk looked at Cell with eyes that were nothing but focus. And in those eyes was the accumulated reading of every energy signature on this battlefield. Every power level the other guy had cataloged since arriving, and the simple, enormous conclusion that Cell was the largest thing present, and therefore the correct problem. Cell turned from the rift, looked at the Hulk, and reassessed. "There it is," he said softly. "I wondered when the Gamma Giant would stop pretending." The Hulk didn't answer. The Hulk crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and hit Cell with both fists simultaneously, and the resulting impact registered on seismic equipment in 3 adjacent prefectures. The Hulk fought without technique and didn't need any. What Bruce Banner's other form brought to the engagement was something the battle had been missing: Not more power, though the power was significant, but a kind of combat physics that Cell's absorbed fighting styles hadn't accounted for. Every technique Cell carried was derived from key users. Key users fought with precision, with energy economy, with the layered strategic intelligence of warriors who had spent lifetimes learning that how you hit mattered as much as how hard. The Hulk did not fight with precision or economy or strategy. The Hulk fought with the absolute, unqualified conviction that the correct response to any problem was to hit it harder than it had ever been hit before. And if that didn't work, to hit it harder again. The Cell's first absorbed instinct, Vegeta's, said guard high, exploit the overextension. The Hulk had no overextension because the Hulk had no technique to overextend. Cell's second absorbed instinct, Goku's, said read the energy signature, anticipate the movement. The Hulk's energy signature was pure gamma radiation with no Chi component, which meant Cell's Chi-based threat assessment was reading an incomplete picture. The Hulk moved before Cell finished the assessment, and the fist arrived before the adjustment. The third strike drove Cell 40 meters underground. Goku watched from 20 feet away, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other pushing Ki back into his body to stabilize the damage from Cell's knee strike. He watched the Hulk pull Cell out of the crater by the ankle and swing him into the hillside. And his expression moved from pained to genuinely astonished to something that was unmistakably excited. "Vegeta," he said. Vegeta had extracted himself from the rock face and was standing 30 meters back, one arm hanging at an angle that suggested structural concerns. His aura flickering as his scion biology began the aggressive cellular repair that made their species so dangerous to fight over extended engagements. He looked at the Hulk's assault with the expression of a man doing math. "The Gamma creature is buying us minutes," Vegeta said. "Not victory. Cell will adapt." "I know." Goku straightened, ribs complaining. Ki reserves lower than he wanted. "We need to end it. Not just push him back. End it." "The spirit bomb," Piccolo said, appearing at Goku's left. His cape was gone, so one arm partially regenerated from a strike he'd absorbed in the exchange 3 minutes ago. "If the Hulk holds him..." "The dimensional travelers," Goku said suddenly. And the idea assembled itself in the way his best ideas always did. Not through careful reasoning, but through the pure, instinctive understanding of a fighter who thought in energy rather than logic. He turned to where Steve had reformed the Avengers cluster at the lot's edge, Tony's suit casting a low blue glow as the reactor climbed toward combat threshold. They're from outside this universe. Their energy is completely different from ours. Thor's divine power, Tony's arc reactor, the energy from the Mind Stone. He looked at Piccolo. The spirit bomb gathers energy from all living things willing to give it. We've never had living things from another universe on the field before. Piccolo was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which for Piccolo was equivalent to an extended deliberation. Different energy types folded into a single attack, he said slowly. Cell's absorbed defenses are calibrated against Chi. A spirit bomb with multiversal energy composition. He won't have a counter for it, Goku finished, because nothing like it has ever existed. Cell resurfaced from the hillside. The Hulk had bought 40 seconds, which in this battle's economy was substantial. But Cell had spent those 40 seconds adapting to gamma-based combat physics with the engineered efficiency of a being designed to absorb and overcome. And when he came back up, he was moving differently. Lower center of gravity, shorter responses. No longer trying to read the Hulk's technique because he'd correctly identified there was none to read. He caught the Hulk's next strike on crossed forearms and redirected it. The impact still catastrophic but controlled, and drove an elbow into the Hulk's collarbone that staggered the green giant for the first time. The Hulk did not go down. He shook his head once, slowly, looked at Cell, and hit him again. But the momentum had shifted, and everyone on the battlefield felt it. Steve reached Goku in 15 seconds, reading his expression, reading Piccolo's, assembling the tactical picture with the speed that had made him irreplaceable in every configuration of the Avengers. "What do you need?" Goku explained quickly. Steve listened without interrupting, which was a quality Goku appreciated in people. When Goku finished, Steve turned to his team without hesitation. "Thor, he needs your power, voluntary contribution, not combat. Can you do it?" Thor understood energy transfer at an instinctive Asgardian level. To fuel his technique? Yes, freely and fully. No hesitation. Mjolnir came down, and Thor raised his free hand, divine energy already responding to the intent. Tony's faceplate snapped up, reactor at 70% and climbing. "My turn to contribute something useful," he said, and there was nothing ironic in it. He opened the chest plate's emission array and began a controlled output, not a weapon discharge, but a sustained energy release, the arc reactor giving what it had freely into the air above them. "Come and get it." Steve looked at Natasha. Natasha reached into her kit and removed a small device, compact, glowing faintly. The Mind Stone's frequency modulator Tony had built after Thanos, designed to neutralize stone energy in extremis. She looked at it for a moment. "This works the other way too," Tony said quietly. "Broadcast instead of suppress." Natasha set it to broadcast and placed it on the ground between them. The energy that rose from the assembled group, Kai from Piccolo, divine power from Thor, arc reactor output from Tony, Mind Stone resonance from Natasha's device, and the simple, earnest life energy of Steve Rogers, who had no powers and gave what he had anyway, lifted into the atmosphere in a column that was unlike any spirit bomb Goku had ever gathered. It wasn't a single color. It moved in layers, the gold and blue of Kai, the white gold of Asgard, the clean blue of arc reactor technology, and threaded through it all the faint, an impossible shimmer of energy that had never existed in Universe 7 before today. Goku rose into the air. With his hands raised above his head, the spirit bomb grew. Cell, extracting himself from the Hulk's grip with a power burst that sent the green giant sliding 20 meters, felt the energy gathering and turned. His expression, for the first time since arriving on the battlefield, showed something it hadn't shown before. Not fear. Cell was engineered past fear. But the absorbed instincts of every fighter inside him, Goku's and Vegeta's and Piccolo's and all the others, collectively recognized what was forming above them and collectively registered the same response. This was different. "The dimensional energy," Cell said softly, reading the spirit bomb's composition with the precise attention he'd given Tony's suit and Thor's lightning. He's weaving it into the attack. His tail moved. "Clever. I hadn't modeled this configuration." He powered up fully, everything, every cell, every absorbed warrior's output pushed to maximum simultaneously. The ground around him turned to gravel from the pressure. The air ionized. The sky above the industrial district went dark from competing energy fields. Vegeta landed beside Goku, battered and aura flickering, one arm still moving wrong. He looked up at the spirit bomb, its strange layered, multiversal composition, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Don't miss." "I never miss," Goku said. "You have missed," Vegeta said flatly. "Not today," Goku said, and brought the spirit bomb down. Cell met it with both hands extended, a counterblast of concentrated ki fired directly upward. The collision generating a detonation that expanded outward in a dome of white light and erased every standing structure within 2 kilometers. The sound arrived at Bulma's position as a physical impact. The energy reading on her scanner simply displayed an error message and then restarted. The spirit bomb's layered composition did exactly what Goku had theorized. Cell's absorbed defenses parsed the key component and managed it. They parsed Thor's divine energy and weathered it. They had no parsing protocol for arc reactor output folded into Mind Stone resonance, folded into the particular dimensional frequency of energy that had never existed in Universe 7 before today. And those components didn't need to hurt Cell to matter. They needed to interrupt his counter, to stutter the precision of his upward blast for a half second, or to let the spirit bomb's momentum tip the balance. The Hulk hit Cell from behind at full speed. The three-way collision, spirit bomb above, Hulk behind, Cell between, was not elegant, and it was not clean, and it was definitively, catastrophically effective. Cell went through the spirit bomb's lower edge and into the ground, and continued going, the detonation following him down. And when the dust began to settle after a duration that felt geological, there was a crater where the eastern half of the industrial district had been. And at its center, Cell lay still. Not dead. Cell's regeneration was already flickering across the carapace in slow, labored pulses. But still. And for now, in this economy of moments, still was enough. Goku descended slowly, ki reserves near empty, body protesting in several specific locations. Then he landed at the crater's edge and looked down. The Hulk stood at the crater's center, chest heaving, looking at Cell with the expression of something that had decided its problem was solved, and was beginning the long process of becoming Bruce Banner again. The green faded by degrees, the enormous frame contracting, until Bruce sat in the rubble a second time in one day, blinking at the destruction with the look of a man doing damage assessment math and finding the numbers large. "Did it work?" he asked. "It worked," Piccolo said. Bruce exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. "I'd like to not do that again immediately." The rift reopened at sunset. It wasn't dramatic. No crack of dimensional lightning, no reality-tearing violence to mirror the entry. Bruce and Tony worked the equation for 3 hours in the ruins of the warehouse. Bulma's scanner feeding data into Tony's rebuilt suit systems, while Bulma herself moved between their workstations with the focused energy of someone who had decided this was the most interesting afternoon she'd had since building a time machine and intended to extract every piece of useful information before it concluded. The solution, when they found it, was almost elegant. A controlled collision between the Mind Stone's broadcast frequency and a focused ki discharge at the exact resonant point of the rift's residual scar, held open for 90 seconds by Thor's sustained divine energy output, bridging the gap. Simple, us in the way that things are simple after 3 hours of work and one near-apocalyptic battle. Cell had been contained, not destroyed, which Piccolo had advised against, with the pragmatic reasoning of someone who had learned that destroying Cell completely tended to produce outcomes that required their own solutions. He was bound in a suppression field that Bulma designed and Piccolo powered, stable for 72 hours, which was sufficient. Sufficient was, at this point, a word that carried considerable emotional weight. The Avengers stood at the rift's location in the industrial district's western lot, the only section that hadn't been converted to rubble. In the long amber light of a sun that set at the same angle in this universe as in their own. Tony's suit was at full power. Steve's shield had been returned intact. Thor looked rested in the way that Asgardians look rested after combat, which was essentially the same as they looked normally, but with more satisfaction in the eyes. Bruce had his glasses back. One lens was cracked. He had not mentioned it. Goku stood opposite them, hands behind his head, with the expression of a person who had thoroughly enjoyed a day that most people would classify as catastrophic. Vegeta stood 6 feet to his right, with his arms folded, which was his standard stance for situations requiring either combat or social interaction. And he appeared to have made a decision not to classify the two as different. Piccolo stood slightly back from them both, arms folded, watching the rift sight with the steady attention he gave to things that required watching. "The key discharge needs to be significant," Tony said, looking at Goku. "Bruce's math says it needs to hit the resonant point at a minimum threshold to hold it open long enough for transit. I can calculate exactly what that means in your energy terms, if you—" "I've got it," Goku said, reading Tony's face with the intuitive accuracy of someone who processed people through energy rather than language. "One Kamehameha, focused and sustained. I can hold it exactly on the point." "And I will hold the divine bridge," Thor said. Mjolnir already beginning its slow rotation, lightning tracing lazy arcs toward the rift site. Tony looked at Goku for a moment. The expression on his face was one that Steve recognized from specific rare occasions. The look Tony Stark wore when he'd learned something that mattered and was deciding whether to acknowledge it, and which was a process that had become faster over the years, but never entirely easy. "I've been outclassed before," Tony said finally. "Not usually this thoroughly. But I want you to know." He paused. "What you built here, the way you fight, the way all of you fight." He looked at Piccolo, at Vegeta, back to Goku. "It's not just power. There's something underneath it." "Training," Vegeta said immediately, as if the answer was so obvious it barely needed saying. "And friendship," Goku added, with the complete, uncomplicated sincerity that consistently wrong-footed people who expected a warrior of his caliber to speak differently. "You can't get to where we are alone. You need people who push you, people worth protecting, or people who make you want to be stronger tomorrow than you are today." He looked at the Avengers, at Steve's battered shield and Thor's crackling hammer and Bruce's cracked glasses and Natasha and Clint, who had spent a battle finding ways to matter against odds that should have made mattering impossible. "You've got that." I could feel it. Steve looked at him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Goku shook it. Vegeta watched this exchange with the expression of someone observing a social ritual he found unnecessary, but had chosen not to comment on, which was, for Vegeta, considerable growth. Thor clasped Goku's forearm in the Asgardian warrior's grip. "When this rift closes," he said, "I will think about this fight for a long time. You are unlike anything the 9 realms have produced. Come back sometime," Goku said. "We'll spar properly. No distractions, no cell, just a real fight." His eyes lit up at the prospect. "I want to see what that hammer does when you're not holding back." Thor's smile was broad and genuine. I was not holding back. "I know," Goku said happily. "That's what makes it interesting." Tony looked at Bruce. Bruce looked at Tony. A lifetime of specific shared shorthand passed between them in approximately 1 second. "Ready?" Tony asked. "Absolutely not," Bruce said. "Let's go." The Kamehameha built in Goku's cupped hands, blue-white, dense, focused to a precision that Tony's rebuilt sensors tracked with genuine admiration. Thor raised Mjolnir, and the divine bridge pulsed between hammer and rift scar, gold-white energy holding the dimensional boundary at the resonant point like a key in a lock. Tony's suit fired a narrow beam at the rift's exact coordinate, the arc reactor's unique energy signature providing the final harmonic frequency. The rift opened cleanly. 90 seconds. The amber light from the other side was the same angle as the sunset behind them. The Avengers stepped through one by one. Steve last, turning at the threshold. He looked at the Z fighters, Goku's grin, Vegeta's chin lifted in something that was not acknowledgement but contained it. Piccolo's steady watch, the wasteland behind them, converted to geography by two teams who had fought each other's battles before they chose to. "Don't let the next one be worse than Cell," Steve said. "No promises," Piccolo said. The rift closed. Goku stood in the silence for a moment, reading the residual energy of the sealed boundary, the last traces of arc reactor frequency and divine power and Mind Stone resonance dissolving into Universe 7's atmosphere. He could still feel where the Hulk's gamma signature had pressed against his Kai sense, distinctive and enormous, and unlike anything this universe's power systems had produced. He'd remember that signature. He'd remember all of them. Vegeta uncrossed his arms. His aura flickered once, blue, brief, and went still. "The Gamma creature," he said to no one in particular, in the tone of a man filing something under future reference. "When Bruce Banner releases control entirely." A pause. "I want to know what that ceiling is." "Me too," Goku said. Vegeta looked at him sideways. "Of course you do." The desert wind moved through the ruined district and far to the north. Bulma's scanner was already sending readings to the lab. 3 hours of dimensional data that would occupy her for weeks and produce 3 patents and 1 paper she would never submit because it would require explaining things she wasn't ready to explain to people who weren't ready to understand them. Krillin would call in 20 minutes wanting to know everything. And Gohan was already on his way, having spent the afternoon tracking energy signatures from a distance, with the methodical attention of someone who had inherited his father's curiosity and his mother's restraint. And somewhere in a sealed suppression field outside the ruined district, Perfect Cell's regeneration continued its slow, patient work. And his mind turned over the data of the afternoon. The Spirit Bomb's multiversal composition, the Hulk's gamma physics, of the arc reactor's energy signature, the divine frequency of Mjolnir. Cataloging each element with the thorough, unhurried attention of a being engineered to improve without limit. Who would think of it, always, as unfinished business? Goku sensed it from a distance and made a note. Tomorrow, he decided, he would train harder. The Z fighters had faced invasions, cosmic tyrants, magical chaos entities, and the casual threat of divine erasure. What they had never faced was fighters from beyond their universe's physics entirely. Warriors who operated without Kai, who measured power in technologies and divine bloodlines and gamma radiation and the raw, unbreakable will of a man with a shield and nothing else. The Avengers had never faced a world where power scaled past planetary, where training was the only honest currency, where the weakest fighter on the field had survived things that should have ended everything. Both teams left different. The Avengers returned to a universe that felt, for the first time, finite, not small, but bounded, and therefore precious. The Z fighters returned to their training with a new calibration, a new reference point, a new answer to the question of what strength looked like when it came from somewhere they'd never mapped. Cell's suppression field had 71 hours and 40 minutes remaining. Goku was already in the gravity chamber. And across the sealed dimensional boundary, in a universe that had never heard of Ki, Thor sat alone with Mjolnir in his lap and thought about a man in an orange gi who had blocked his hammer with a forearm and asked, with complete sincerity, whether he wanted to spar again. He smiled. The strongest opponent he had ever met had looked at his full power and called it interesting. That, Thor decided, was the greatest compliment he had ever received. The adventure never ends. More stories await.